Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. Welcome back to Blue Boards. This time we're here checking out the Shards of Infinity deck building game. But I'm just going to call it Shards of Infinity. It's by Gary Arant and Justin Gary. We're also going to be checking out the first expansion, Relics of the Future, developed by the same people. We're also going to be checking out the second expansion, which is Shards of Infinity Shadow of Salvation. And we're also going to be checking out the third expansion, Shards of Infinity Into the Horizon. Because I bought all of that straight up when I first heard about this game. I played a game called Hero Realms, which was a deck builder in of itself. And then I heard about Shards of Infinity. And I've played a game these guys put out previously, like way before I was even into board games like this, called Ascension. I played it on my phone. And then I heard about this game, which is Hero Realms, which was cool at the time, but it's the guys who did Ascension that did it. And I was like, I'm so in. So we'll just focus on the main box for now, but we'll talk about the contents of the expansions later, because I'd like for you to have an idea of how the game's developed over time. So, Shards of Infinity, pretty damn simple. We have 4 Shard Masters here, and these Shard Masters are all the strongest survivors of a world gone bang, because of the Shards of the Infinity Stone or something? They call it something like that. It's not an Avengers reference. At least I hope it's not. But the idea is that they are now trying to master what is left in order to take control of the ruins of the planet. And so, as a result, you are fighting against 1, 2, or 3 other players. We'll use Volos as this demonstration. And Volos starts out, everybody starts out with 50 health and 0 mastery. Simple enough, we'll just put him down there. Everybody also has a simple 10 card deck. So we have, just as a demonstration, we have 7 crystals. We have an Infinity Shard, a Blaster, and a Shard Reactor. Crystals are money, basically. You spend them to buy cards from the center row. Everything else is damage except for the Shard Reactor, which just gives you a few extra crystals. What do you spend those crystals on? You spend them on cards from the center row. And these cards form what is called the market. And they are all drawn from the center deck, and whenever something is bought from the market, something from the center deck will immediately replace it. So how does a basic turn go? At the start of the game, you've only got your basic 10 cards, and they will form, excuse me for a moment, they will form a deck, and you'll draw 5 of them. I definitely didn't draw 5 there. Yep, I drew 6. That was pretty close, actually. And then you'll play them. And with crystals, you'll decide how to spend them. So we've got a few options here. We can buy anything that is 5 crystals or less. So we've basically got run of the board right now. And if we buy something, let's just say we buy the Cage Warden, as an example, it will go into our discard pile. And once we're done, all of the crystals will end up here, on top of the same discard pile. But we still have 3 more, so we could wait for the next thing to be flipped up, but it's something we can't afford. So we could choose to buy the Cloud Oracles, flip up another card, and then we could choose to spend our final crystal to focus in order to get us 1 mastery. We'll get to what mastery means in a minute. But once we're done, all the cards we played this turn will enter our discard pile. And let's just say, for example, that it comes back around to us. We've already taken our second turn, and these come on top of the discard pile here. We will then shuffle this deck. Just imagine I'm shuffling it, because I can't really do it very effectively from this angle. And this becomes our new deck. So all the cards that we have bought now come to our hand, and it means that we can now use them for our nefarious purposes. And so as a result, you are slowly buying new cards, making use of them, and using them to try and eliminate the enemy, whichever way you see fit. And I do mean that whichever way you see fit, quite literally, because the thing about this game is that it actually has 2 win conditions. A few of these deck builders only have 1 win condition, which is kill the enemy, but technically this game has 2. And it does it in a really engaging way that really helps add to the strategy. So, you heard me talking about mastery earlier. So, mastery is checked out down here on the bottom right of the thing. These cards have some, cards. These player panels, I guess we can call them, have some really nice art on them. I actually really like the way that they do this. It's way better than the cards they give you in something like Hero Realms. But admittedly, it does kind of knock the dials out of place if you end up putting it on the wrong surface or what have you. So you have to be a little bit careful of that, but it's honestly not that big of a deal. But if you're annoyed by little things like that, it's worth noting. But as I was saying, there is something called Mastery. And Mastery actually affects the power of your cards. So to use a basic card from your deck as an example, this card, the Shard Reactor, normally gives you 2 crystals, which is a decent enough reward. But if you get 5 Mastery, it gets you 3 crystals instead of 2. And if you get 15, you get 4 instead of 3. So the more Mastery that you have, the more powerful your cards are. And it's not restricted to just the Shard Reactor. Like, we've got another example right here. The Aether Breaker starts with 4 damage, but if you have 10 Mastery, you get 8 damage. And there are more cards like this in the center deck. I won't dig through it in order to prove to you that it's there, but I really like this system because certain cards that would otherwise be quite weak and not worth the effort to buy and keep around genuinely become more useful in this format, because the more that you power yourself up, the more that you power your cards up. And it gives you a little bit of an extra something to go for. You don't just have to go for the stronger cards. You can think to yourself, okay, is it worth going for the Mastery this time because I can make my cards more powerful in the process? And there is a secondary win condition. You do just have to, like, beat the crap out of the enemy, right? That is absolutely something that you can do. But we do have one more thing that we can do here. Another one of the basic cards that's included in the deck is the Infinity Shard. Starts with 2 damage. 10 Mastery, gain 3. 20 Mastery, gain 4. 30 Mastery, gain Infinity. So if you get the 30 Mastery, you can wipe out everyone on the board just by playing your Infinity Shard. It's brilliant. It's brilliant in so many different ways for a game like this, and I can't sing its praises enough, because it does so many different things that these deck builders are guilty of and fixes them. So, the 30 Mastery, the first thing it does, especially for a game like Hero Realms, where I've only played, let's say, a handful of games of Hero Realms, and I've watched a couple of others, and they seem to turn out the same 2 ways each time. Either they go on forever because 2 players get immensely powerful and just spend ages throwing back and forth at each other, or someone gets overly powerful and just wins. It automatically prevents that first condition because there's a time limit. People slowly gaining experience are going to start working their way towards the Infinity Shard, so you can't stay there forever, plus your health is capped at 50. So you can't heal up into the hundreds or 200s and never have anyone be able to damage you. So it does a fantastic job at making sure the game will actually end at some point, which is great. But it also ensures 2 different win conditions, which means that you've got 2 different paths to go down, which means you really have to think about what you're doing on any particular turn. Some people call Shards of Infinity it's like an autopilot deck builder, I think is the term I heard used, where the card that you want is always going to be obvious. But that's not quite true. It's never quite true, because there are so many ways you can use all of these cards together, and combined with the fact that you have 2 different ways to go, whether it be pure damage or damage via XP, it means that you've got a lot of different ways to go about things, and picking the right way or the wrong way can absolutely spell victory or loss for you. And it keeps the game interesting because of all the different ways that you can play around this concept. And it helps that all the cards are, well, first off, all the cards are really well balanced. Even cards like, say, the Grand Architect, which are like, hey, you get like 1/6 of the way to your experience if you use this once, and if you just cycle it through your deck a few times, you'll get there. Even that is very well balanced, because that 7 crystals is a lot, and it's really hard to get that consistently at the very least, because you can't get 7 crystals right off the bat, so you're not going to be able to afford that right out the gate. And all of the weaker cards, again, tend to get powered up over time, or they just tend to be relatively good, while at the same time not being so massively overpowered that someone can swing around and beat you on their 3rd turn. So it keeps the game balanced, interesting, and strategically deep, because you've always got two ways to go. All the cards are useful, and even then, there's a lot of strategies in the way these ones work with each other. So for example, let's list out all the strategies that these guys are working with. So we've got the Cryptophist Monk. They are part of the Order, and the Order are usually focused around draw power and, what's what I'm looking for? Experience gain. So they're usually focused around getting through your deck and making sure you have as much experience as possible so that your cards are nice and powerful and the Infinity Shard isn't too far out of reach. We have a Homodius card here, which is mainly focused around champions, making them bounce off each other, giving you some really powerful champions to work with. In this case, every champion that you have out of this type will give you a little bit extra attack power, which can be very useful if you're going for that sort of strategy. And then you've got Aetherbreaker, who's part of the Wraith, or the Wraith, or I don't know how you pronounce that, which is mainly focused around direct damage and culling your deck so that you're drawing to your more powerful cards faster. And they're also focused around like having their cards in your graveyard or in your deck for more powerful attacks. And then you've got the Undergrowth, who are really good at bouncing off each other, using their effects to power up their own individual cards. Like for example, you get one effect, but if you've played another Undergrowth this turn, you'll get an extra effect on top of that. But all of these cards also work really well together, as opposed to apart. So you can figure out all sorts of strategies. Like, do you want to go for a bit of draw power and then make all your opponents quiver and focus on healing themselves? Go for blue and purple, because that's what they're meant for. Do you want to focus on just being an outright damage dealer? Get champions. I keep calling them constructs because I'm used to Ascension terminology. Get champions and get your allies from your Wraith pals, because they'll be doing an absolute ton of damage. Want to turn yourself into a tank and then just be dishing out damage? Send out the greens and the purples, the Wraith and the Undergrowth, because they will absolutely help you out in that regard. Want to focus on going for your XP, but you want to tank up as well? Go for your blue and go for your green. And even then, that isn't stopping you from going multiple factions. Like, you can easily make like a 4-faction deck and not be completely useless. And as a result, it gives the game a lot of flexibility. Combine that with the fact that you've got 2 ways to go for victory, just direct damage and mastery, and it gives the game an absolute ton of strategic depth, and there's an absolute ton of strategies that can help you out. Like, for example, my good buddy, the Corvus Legionnaire here. Actually, he's not. The champions are my least favorite faction to play, but that's just personal preference. Because he can return champions from your discards to your hand, so he can just be constantly bringing back champions, and not only are champions focused around the Homodius, but the Wraith have some great champions as well, and it's not like the Undergrowth and the Order are too far behind. The Grand Architect. You want to go for experience, or you want to stop other people from getting experience? Grab him, make your cards just that little bit more powerful, and then just toss him out, because there are a couple of other really cool mechanics I haven't gone into yet, so let's do that right now. See that red border around the outside of the card? This is what's called a mercenary. So instead of buying him, spending the crystals, and putting him into your discard pile like you normally would with a card like this, you can choose to pay his cost, use the effect immediately, and then flip him over and stick him at the bottom of the store deck. So you can deny people from using that. You can use your spare crystals to buff you up just that little bit more, and it creates just another layer of really neat strategy, because it just gives you more options, more interesting things to do. And even then, there's strategies around this too. Like, Wraith has a set of sub-abilities, which is like, hey, bring some mercenaries back to your hand. So you can be constantly bringing back the Grand Architect and using that to get some more experience. Or you can constantly be bringing back Aetherbreaker and just doing more and more damage. And there are more mercenaries. There's more effects all over the place. It's really well balanced so that every faction can be used in pretty much every strategy imaginable. And it does a really great job at it. And even then, there's more. So, the Cryptophist Monk. See that shield there? At the end of your turn, you always draw back up to 5, but you don't get to use those cards until your next turn. Which means that if you've got this card in your hand, it will block direct damage. So you can just hold up a shield and be like, hey, don't touch me. Which is incredibly useful when you're trying to do something like, say, go for a bunch of XP. And of course, I haven't talked about the champions. They sit out in front of you, you can tap them every turn in order to use their effect, and you need to hit them with that much damage to kill them, the green cross with the number in the middle of it. They can't block you from direct damage, but their abilities will give you something to think about. Even the cheaper champions have some really powerful abilities, and you need to think, okay, how do I want to split my damage? Do I want to take out this champion, or do I want to take out his health directly? Especially when you've got 3 other people surrounding you. Things can get tough. And even at 3 or 4 players, I've never felt like this was too over the top with luck. I will say that at 4 players, it might be worth house ruling a bigger market, and trust me, I've done that, and I'll explain what I mean in a little bit. But, as the copy of the base game, yeah, absolute ton of strategy, great interplay between all of the different factions and their types. Having 2 different win conditions means that the game is not only on a time limit, so it doesn't run into the Hero Realms problem, and the balance is really good, so it doesn't run into the other Hero Realms problem. Everything just feels really balanced, and you can always find yourself making some great strategies, making some great combos and some great plays, and it's always immensely satisfying. That's not to say that some cards aren't inherently more powerful than others. Like, let's just try and find an example in the center deck here. I'm sure there's like 1 or 2. Like, there's always going to be one like the Portal Monk, where it's like, hey, you get a card that's 6 or less for free, and it only costs you three crystals to get. There is almost no reason not to go for that one, but those cards are quite rare, and even then, having just one of these isn't enough to absolutely kill a run. It absolutely isn't, because there's always going to be at least 6 cards in the middle. There's always going to be a way around most problems. So yeah, the Shards of Infinity base game is great. Shards of Infinity Relics of the Future absolutely smashes it. If there is any one expansion that you need to get for Shards of Infinity right out of the gate, it's this one. And I normally don't like that sort of thing, because it's like, you know, oh, you really need to spend $100 to make sure this game is really fun. And it's like, no, I don't subscribe to that theory, but this absolutely adds a ton of worthwhile strategy, and I'd like to demonstrate what I mean. The minor addition is that you get a bunch of new cards for the center deck, and the majority of the cool ones are ones that will add very specific effects depending on the faction or even the hero, because despite the fact that they all look cool and look so different, on the surface of things, all 4 of these guys are exactly the same. In the base game, it doesn't matter who you pick, it's exactly the same. But this changes things. So, you get cards that very specifically work around specific heroes. So for the Lost, you get, if you are Ko Sin Woo, you may banish a card from your hand or discard pile, along with 6 attack, just as a default baseline. Really damn good for 4 credits, so you want to keep that away from the Ko Sin Woo player as much as possible. Hounds of Volos, gain 5 health. If you're Volos, gain 5 attack. Again, really powerful for him only. If you are Decima, your champions are a fair bit stronger. Again, you want to keep that away from him. And if you are Tetra, gain an experience and you just draw a card by default. And there's a bit of shield on there. So yeah, again, a really good card for Tetra. And there's a few of these in the center deck. And they all make all of the characters just that little bit different and just that little bit more exciting. And then you've got the rest, which don't require specific, they don't require, specific heroes, but they do add a bit more to the overall, just interplay between the factions. So, if there's a Wreath card in your discard pile, gain 3 attack. Another Tetra one, another Ferrata. Limited Drones. If you control a champion, you may banish a card from your hand or discard pile and draw a card. Really cheap banishing. Really good if you're going for a champion attack. A champion that can't be attacked by anyone who's got less XP than you, and you draw a card. So it's absolutely fantastic for an XP gain strategy. There's another The Lost, there's another Paul Shades. Draw a card and some more Unify effects. So really good for your green strategies. A really fantastic Homodius champion. And just some general strategic improvements, right? Some really good overall just buffing of certain factions and certain strategies. Nothing wrong with that. But the big addition in this expansion, and what you should absolutely be buying this for, is the Relics. Here are the Relics. You get 2 for each character, and they absolutely can change the way that the game plays. So, at 10 experience, you get to take one of these for free, and you get to drop it straight into your discard pile, no cost. And they have some overwhelmingly strong effects. So, the difference here is that the World Piercer lets you get mercenaries back to your hand, but if you manage to get to 20 experience, you get all the mercenaries back. So if you're running with a bunch of mercenaries, wonderful. But if you're not, the Heart of Nothing lets you do a bunch of damage and draw some cards. So when you're in the in-between and you don't know which one of these you have to pick, it's rough. And it is worth noting that you don't have to pick which one you want until you get to 10 Mastery, until you know which direction your strategy is going, which gives it just that little bit more up and down value. Sometimes it's pretty obvious which one you want to go for, but sometimes it isn't. And that's what makes this Relics really interesting. For Decima, the one that's focused around Homodius, he gets a champion that protects him from direct damage, and he gets a card that comes back to his hand whenever he plays champions, and he gets damage. Just straight up flat damage. And it's also worth noting that all of these relics have really highly powerful values here when you get to 20 experience. So they get powerful along with the rest of your deck. Tetra, with her ones, is attack focused or shield focused. And again, you don't know which one you're really going to need until you really get down to the wire sometimes. And with Volos, the Undergrowth, you can either get an absolute ton of healing. This is a full heal at 20 XP if you've played another green card. Or you can draw 2 cards and gain power for each health you heal. Not to mention you heal 10 health when you power it up, so it's just 10 free attack. So they do have their own strategies that they go for, but they still massively change up the way that you play around with these heroes, the way that you strategize around building their decks, the way that you play the game. And it adds that much needed variety to the characters themselves. And I can't help but love that expansion because it's a relatively cheap one. I got it for like $20. You can probably get it for around the same price. And for everything that it adds, I would fully recommend that you just buy that immediately. Just get Shards of Infinity and Shards of Infinity Relics of the Future right off the bat as a combo deal, because it is well worth getting that little bit of extra variety in the characters. Now we move on to Shadow of Salvation. Now, Shadow of Salvation actually has a single-player campaign where you go up against a series of bosses, and these bosses have these cards here, and these cards do things when you turn them over. You turn them over like a villain deck, and they have all sorts of relatively powerful abilities. And they've also got things like cards that can go in your deck, and they have the ability to add cards to your deck. But I've given this a try, and I'd be lying if I said I was not massively impressed, because the campaign itself is really just 4 battles in a row, and you get to choose which one, and there's not very much in the way of story or anything like that. It's okay, the single player content, I'm honestly just not impressed. However, for multiplayer, which is by far the most important thing, you get introduced to an entirely new 5th faction in the form of Rez. Rez is basically Lightning McQueen if he was edgy, because his entire thing is focused around speed. Ion will get their own cards back from the deck. They can play cards from the center row for free, and they are based around just doing that over and over again. And they are really strong. They are genuinely also a hell of a lot of fun to fight. And you even get your own relics, including what might be the absolute best relic effect in the entire game, or experience effect too in the entire game. Game run mastery and draw a card. At mastery 20, Rez takes an additional turn. This effect may only happen once per game. absolutely brilliant. I've never had an opportunity to pull that off, but it's fun just on the surface of it. And he also gets this. Banish up to 3 allies in your hand or discard pile and gain their effects. So you can just like get rid of 3 cards from your discard pile and just use them again immediately. Which might be really good if you've got like 9 experience left and you've got the Grand Architect and 2 other experience cards in your discard pile just waiting to be used again. Again, with Res, you get just an absolute ton of speed. And I really like the concept of this guy. The only downside being that despite the fact that everyone else has like 20-something cards in the center deck, Res only gets 9. Is that 9? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 9. He only gets 9 cards in the center deck. And again, some of these are really good, like Breaker. When you get this card, you immediately put it into your hand, and then you get to immediately play it and fast play any of the non-champions in the center row for free. It's immensely powerful and really enjoyable to pull off, even when you're not playing as Res. But when you are playing as Res, use Breaker, then on your next turn, use Dash, fetch an Ion card from your discard pile and put it on top of your deck. Do that with Breaker, and just keep doing that over and over to just keep using Breaker. Again, he feels like the Lightning McQueen of Shards of Infinity. But yeah, 9 cards means that they're not going to be coming up very much. That's my main issue with it. It's always been the faction that just doesn't get that much support. But Res is still well worth it. And it's also worth noting that he comes with his own, like, 10 card deck. So you can up the player count to 5. It's also worth noting that these also come with their own, like, special modes that you can play. Because Relics of the Future and Shadow of Salvation have their own special setups here. And they come with some really unique ideas. So for Relics, you get a couple of extra ways to play with multiplayer, like 3-player Bloodbath, which will be like, hey, everybody does damage to 2 people instead of 1. Or a 2 versus 2 mode. Or, in the case of, you can even like draft relics or just give them out randomly, so that just makes things a bit more interesting. But the coolest thing about Relics of the Future specifically is that it gives you the Nemesis challenge, although this isn't technically updated for Shadow of Salvation, but it's pretty easy to guess once you've played with Shadow of Salvation what Res is supposed to get, where you get your starter deck and there's a set of rules to make the AI draw cards off the top of the store deck and then play the cards in the middle of the field that are equal to that card's color or something along those lines. So you can play the game solo, outside of course, playing the solo battles, and I actually like that mode better than I do the actual campaign. And then Shadow of Salvation actually adds something really cool, and that is the Shadow Champion Draft, because Shadow Champions are exactly what they say on the tin. Let's just do this in a way that you can see a little bit better. They're actually champions that are meant to come out during the single-player campaign. But you can draft these out to people. Give everybody 5, make them discard 2, and then for 3 credits, you can spawn these champions out in front of you and use them as a one-time champion. And doing that at exactly the right time can absolutely turn a game from victory to defeat. And it is genuinely a lot of fun to do that. I have played the game with all of the content, including Into the Horizon, which we haven't gone into, the Shadow Champion Draft, a 10-card market, and the game was insane. It was genuinely a ton of fun. Changes the flavor of the game a little bit, but I still love it. I still think it's great. So, while I wouldn't call Shadow of Salvation essential, if you like Shards of Infinity, you absolutely should get it. Just for Rez and his faction alone, because that, like, playing him, his hero, his relics, and his faction are incredibly fun and really change up the way that the game works if someone manages to get off a good Rez deck. And now we have the final expansion for the time being, which is Shards of Infinity Into the Horizon. So the first thing that this adds is a new set of center deck cards. It's actually the biggest one there's been so far, because the only center deck cards you get are the Aeon cards, the 9 cards here. And you only get 24 of the center deck cards in Relics. So this is actually the biggest expansion yet. And they just add a bunch of new utilities for you to use, like a Carnivorous Vine, which is quite strong for an Undergrowth player. Cinder Scars, which can play off itself. The Rotten. And then we come to the Ingeminax. When these guys come out of the center deck, they attack every player, and then they're up for grabs. You can hit them and get their rewards. And this can come back in some really damn cool ways. So if I just find the other ones. So, Corruption, look who it is. It's Res, and look what the reward is. You get a second relic. Yep, you get a second bloody relic. Or Brutality, which hits everyone, but lets you heal up a fair bit. So there's only 5 of the Ingeminax in the center deck, but when they do come up, they absolutely do change the way that the game is balanced, because take them out for a free reward, which might push you back up towards victory, or if you're like me, you still manage to beat the crap out of the guy who tried to pull that on you. They're a fun addition, but honestly I wish there were a little more, because there really are only 5 of these in the new center deck cards. And when you're playing with every single card in the center deck, there's just so little chance to draw them that sometimes games go by without seeing a single one. So it would be nice to see like a couple more, maybe, just to make the likeliness of stumbling across them come up. But yeah, you've also got just some new center deck cards, including J-Cord, which again, just really continues to pump on that Lightning McQueen energy. Warp 3, play anything that costs 3 or less for free. 15 experience, Warp 5 instead. Incredibly powerful. Orn Madu for a lot of healing. Legion Carrier for a bit more champion searching. Sacrifice health equal to the cost of the card you just drew from your deck, but when it gets to 20 experience, you can deal all that damage to your enemies instead. It's brilliant. The shards here. Draw a card. If you've got an Infinity Shard, you can get some experience. Once again, brilliant. G48, reset another champion you control to exhaust it again, or tap it again, as I said earlier. Bloody brilliant if you get it in the right situation. And even with these 30 cards here, all adding these really cool new effects, it still doesn't feel like it's bloating the deck out, because you're only going to get 30 more cards in a center deck that only really comes out to 150. And they're all still really useful. They all still play into each strategy. So yeah, the cards here are really good. But what really brings this expansion to a head is the destinies. Now, I have to apologize here because these sleeves that I've got these in are terrible, and it's probably going to be incredibly shiny on camera. But here's a destiny. A destiny is something that you can get as soon as you hit 5 experience. You don't have to take it immediately, but you can choose to take it as soon as you get to 5. And they will give you some extra abilities. And some of these extra abilities are absolutely bonkers and can absolutely change the way a game plays. If you've played 2 or more even cost cards, get some health. If you've played Homodius and Undergrowth, you may fast play an ally, or you may fast play an ally that costs a bit more. What's this one here? Gain 1 and 1 for each Undergrowth card you've played. And these get ridiculous. You may treat Wraith as Undergrowth and Undergrowth as Wraith. So all the cards that have unify effects on Undergrowth, and trust me, there's a lot of them, will now trigger off purples. And all the purples that say, hey, is there something in the graveyard that triggers off this? Yeah, you can now trigger off them too. It's bloody insane, some of these. Synthesis. Once you get to 15 experience, you can exhaust it for a free card draw. All your champions are stronger. You may put Homodius champions you recruit on top of your deck, so you get them immediately, basically. Champions get you some more power, get some more health. Everyone loses life. Everyone. Some of these are just so bloody cool. You may banish this to add 2 destinies to the destiny row. You start with 6, and then you acquire 2 more. So what these do is they massively change the way that the game plays. because you're always thinking about not only the composition of your deck and what's in it, but what these destinies can do for you. And there are so many of these, and they can all be played in so many different ways. I almost dropped the deck there because these are slippery. There are so many different ways to play around with all this. Oh look, here's my favorite. The Shard Defiant. Pay 2, exhaust. Reveal the top card of the center deck. You may recruit or banish it. If you have played an Ion card this turn, you may repeat this effect a second time. Yep. Ion, I am speed. There are just so many cool little things here, because this was mainly meant for players who are really experienced with the game, because this expansion came out in 2021 and the base game came out in 2018. So we've had 3 years of playing Shards. So this is meant for the expert players who think they know the inside and out of the deck, who think they know all of the strategies they can go for, because depending on what 6 destinies come up, suddenly things can be entirely different. And it makes the game interesting again. And not that it wasn't, but it just adds a bit more interesting on top of it. It gives every card new potential abilities and really remixes the game. And I would happily recommend it as an expansion, but it's sitting below Relics of the Future, but it's above Shadow of Salvation. So yeah, that was a look at Shards of Infinity. I absolutely love it. I think it's a fantastic game. The strategies between all of the cards, the fact that you've got 2 win conditions, the fact that that intuitively adds a time limit to the game and stops it from getting too out of hand. The fact that you've got expansions that genuinely add stuff that's worth playing for, whether it be diversifying what you do with all of the individual Shard Masters, with the Relics, whether it be adding an entirely new faction that is incredibly cool with Ion, whether it be adding things that can attack you from the center deck, like bloody Into the Horizon, or the Destinies that can massively change the way certain decks get played, or your strategies play out, because these absolutely can win and lose you the game if used correctly. I have learned this personally. It's all just really, really good. Really damn good. I rated the base game a 7, roughly, but once you get the expansions in, it's like a 9 to a 9.5. I genuinely have fun every time I play Shards of Infinity, and I'm really looking forward to getting back out to my local board game shop, although by the time you've seen this it would have already happened, and playing a game with all of the expansions, playing with a 12-card row, getting 5 people around, giving them all a bunch of shadow champions, and just going to town and seeing what comes out of the chaos, because this game's so well balanced that I wouldn't be surprised if it could handle that kind of craziness. So yeah, wholeheartedly recommended that you buy the base box and Relics of the Future. Get these as a pack because you really do want what comes in this box, and it's nice and cheap. It's not like a Arkham Horror, the card game, where you have to get like $100 cycle to really appreciate it. And then Shadow of Salvation, while it's not a bad expansion pack, it's probably the lowest one for me, but it still adds that 5th player. It still adds the fantastic Ion faction, and it still adds the Shadow Summoning Draft rules. So it is still worth buying, although it is probably the lowest one. And Into the Horizon, while I would recommend you start with Shards of Infinity and Relics of the Future, if you get far enough in that you think you want more, the Destinies and the 30 cards here will absolutely give you that more. Yeah, I love this game. I'm more than happy to recommend it. And you know what the best part is? You could probably get all of this for I don't know. I'm talking in Aussie bucks, by the way, because I got these 3 for 60 and then this cost me another 20. So you could probably get this all for under $100, and I do personally think that's worth it. But of course, I'm not going to recommend you go all in on a game that you haven't played yet. So if you want my absolute fairest recommendation, start with these 2. It is absolutely worth your time. With that said, This has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.